Hey everyone. This week we're going to talk about facts and relativism, what those things mean, how they apply to 1984, and I'm having you read a short story called No One Died in Tiananmen Square, and it's just really about the power that some governments have to change history when you give an entity control over writing history and telling history, or over the media or something like that. They really do get control over the actual history in many ways. So that's a really fundamental part of 1984, is that the party, which is this larger entity that controls all the people, it's watching all the people, and its big brother is a component. These are all components of the party, which really has ultimate control over the citizens' lives. And Winston Smith, the main character, is kind of battling against that. He's struggling with it. He is experiencing stress based on the fact that he knows that they are lying and they're changing the way that history is being written, and he knows that it's fake, but he doesn't have the evidence to prove it. And so it makes him wonder, like, is it really true? Like, if everyone is thinking the same way, even though something didn't happen actually that way, is that really what happened in reality, and what is all of that? So I'm just gonna show you or read to you a few excerpts from the book that exemplify this, and then you will read, or maybe you've already read, No One Died in Tiananmen Square, and then we're going to answer some questions and talk about those questions on Thursday during our class discussion. So the first little bit that I'm going to read is about how Winston Smith finds this textbook. He finds like a children's textbook in his apartment building, and he realizes that it has all these lies in it. It has this like crazy amount of information that may or may not be true, so I want you to listen to it and see what you think about it. So it says, the thing you invariably came back to was the impossibility of knowing what life before the revolution had really been like. He took out of the drawer a copy of a children's textbook, history textbook, and began copying a passage into the diary. In the old days, it ran, before the glorious revolution, London was not the beautiful city that we know today. It was a dark, dirty, miserable place where hardly anybody had enough to eat, and where hundreds and thousands of poor people had no boots on their feet and not even a roof to sleep under. Children no older than you had to work 12 hours a day for cruel masters who flogged them with whips if they worked too slowly, and fed them on nothing but stale bread crusts and water. But in among all this terrible poverty, there were just a few great, big, beautiful houses that were lived in by rich men who had as many as 30 servants to look after them. These rich men were called capitalists. They were fat, ugly men with wicked faces, like the one in the picture on the opposite page. You can see that he is dressed in a long black coat, which was called a frock coat, and a queer shiny hat shaped like a stovepipe, which was called a top hat. This was the uniform of the capitalists, and no one else was allowed to wear it. The capitalists owned everything in the world, and everyone else was their slave. They owned all the land, all the houses, all the factories, and all the money. If anyone disobeyed them, they could throw him into prison, or he could take his job away and starve him to death. When any ordinary person spoke to a capitalist, he had to cringe and bow to him, and take off his cap and address him as Sir. The chief of all the capitalists was called the King, but Winston knew the rest of the catalog. There would be mention of the bishops in their lawn sleeves, the judges in their ermine robes, the pillory, the stocks, the treadmill, the cat o' nine tails, the Lord Mayor's banquet, and the practice of kissing the Pope's toe. How could you tell how much of it was lies? It might be true that the average human being was better off now than he had been before the revolution. The only evidence to the contrary was the mute protest in your bones, the instinctive feeling that the conditions you lived in were intolerable, and that at some other time they must have been different. So this piece is obviously just Winston looking at this, and if we were in class, I would ask you how much of that excerpt is actually true, because there are parts of it that are absolutely true, and there's parts of it that are true, but they're described in a different way, or it's really biased sounding. And so I would just ask you to think about how much of that is true and what does it mean for it to be true. The facts are there, but is it actually the right information? Is it being coded or sent in some specific way to send some specific message? All of that is part of what goes into this kind of truth. So Winston's job in the book is to essentially, he's a writer who rewrites history. So the party will make all these mistakes. They'll say things that aren't true, and then he will go back and he will fix them so that there is no account of the party ever being wrong in recorded history. So everything that they say that ever is wrong or ends up being not true, they go back. Winston's job is to go back, along with thousands of other people, is to go back, fix the mistake that they made, and then they get rid of all the evidence. So basically they are rewriting history, and I'll just give you a little excerpt of it. So it says, Winston's job was to rectify the original figures by making them agree with the later ones. This process of continuous alteration was applied not only to newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs, to every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown by documentary evidence to have been correct, nor was any item of news or any expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the moment ever allowed to remain on record. So basically, all history was a palimpsest, scraped clean, and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. So there's no way. His job is to go back, and it's not just the media, it's literally everything. So they would go back, they would change books, they would change history books, obviously, they would change cartoons for kids, like anything that had any sort of political message in it, they would go back and make sure that it aligns with what the party said. And so if you looked back, like if we look back in our history, we can find all of these different pieces of information and everything that like relates to the entire history of our world. But you'd go back, and in this world you wouldn't be able to find anything that contradicts what the party is currently saying, which is a really scary thing. So anything that you would learn from would be based on what was written by the party. So they have complete control of knowledge, essentially, which is a really, really scary thought when you think about the depth and the impacts of that long term, and how that can stretch into every aspect of people's lives. So that's his job, which is fascinating. And then let me just go to the next page. So it says, the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, and the ease with which any party intellect would overthrow him in debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand, much less answer, and yet he was in the right. They were wrong, and he was right. The obvious, the silly, and the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. The solid world exists. Its laws do not change. Stones are hard. Water is wet. Objects unsupported fall towards the earth's center. With the feeling that he was speaking to O'Brien, and also that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows. So he's right now battling against this idea. People have told him that 2 + 2 makes 5. And if they say that, and they go back and everything says that, even if you know it's wrong, do you know it's wrong? it's really about like where you're getting your information. He can know in his bones that something is wrong, but if there's no evidence anywhere or no one else to back him up, does it matter? Is that reality, or is reality that 2 + 2 = 5? And can they actually make reality out of saying things over and over? So that is one more, and then I just have the last one. So, and this is about how the party has really all the power. Sorry, there's a tractor, so I'm going to speak a little bit louder and hopefully you can hear over me. But essentially it says, if the party could thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event that it never happened, surely that was more terrifying than mere torture and death. The party said that Oceania had never been in alliance with Eurasia. He, Winston Smith, knew that Oceania had been in alliance with Eurasia as short a time as 4 years ago. But where did that knowledge exist? Only in his own consciousness, which in any case will soon be annihilated. And if all others accept the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And yet the past, though of its nature is alterable, never had been altered. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it in Newspeak, or doublethink. So this is essentially to say that people know, like Winston Smith was alive during the revolution. He knew that airplanes existed before the party, but they say that they invented airplanes. And if there's no evidence to the contrary anywhere in the entire world, and it only exists in people's minds, is that reality? Or did they change reality? I know the inclination is so obviously to say like, well, no, it doesn't change reality, it just changes the interpretation of it. But if those people who have it in their minds die off, and there's no one who thinks anything to the contrary, then does it become reality? So think about that. I'm going to read, keep going with this a little bit more. It says there was no knowing how much of this legend was true and how much was invented. Winston could not remember at what date the party itself had come into existence. Sometimes, indeed, you could put your finger on a definite lie. It was not true, for example, as was claimed in the party history books, that the party had invented airplanes. He remembered airplanes since his earliest childhood. But you could prove nothing. There was never any evidence. And just once in his whole life, he held in his hands unmistakable documentary proof of falsification of a historical fact. And that specific event doesn't matter for us. It matters for the story, obviously, but not in a large scale, what we're talking about. What matters here is the fact that they could change the past. So go on, read the questions, think about what that means, and think about like where you get your information, how you get your information. Are you scrutinous with it? Why do you believe it? Why do you believe some information over other information more easily? And just read through those questions, and I look forward to talking to you and hearing your thoughts on Thursday. Have a good one.